Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here tonight, taking time out of your evening to join us here, and everyone here watching on the live stream here in the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center at the Heartland Institute. This is now, I think, the third event that Heartland has hosted here, and I'm able to say the words. This is the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center, and we're extremely proud to call it that. We contacted his family, and his widow, Susie, gave us her blessing. We contacted the Breitbart News Network and asked them if it'd be okay with them. They said this was such a great honor, of course. We said, really, the honor is ours, because Andrew Breitbart, who died just a little more than 4 years ago, was a hero to a lot of people in this room, and certainly to people all over the country. He was a hero of the Tea Party movement, and the Heartland Institute's been working with the Tea Party since the very beginning, and so it just seemed like a natural fit, and really the honor is ours. You'll see his name is up here on the wall in a couple places. We have a poster here, a picture of him on the wall, and on that poster over here in the corner, there's a quote in there that I pulled out. We showed that at CPAC a few weeks back, and the quote is, "Walk towards the fire, don't worry about what they call you." And that pretty much sums up him, of course, and also the Heartland Institute. If we cared about what people called us, we wouldn't really be in business. And with that, I just want to introduce myself. I see a lot of new faces here. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. Heartland is a 32-year-old think tank that until about 8 months ago was headquartered in downtown Chicago, but is now based here in our own building in the northwest suburbs of Chicago in Arlington Heights. Our mission since our founding has been to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions to social and economic problems, to fight for policies that shrink the scope and the power of government, that increase individual liberty, and encourage prosperity through vibrant free markets, which is why this is a perfect, or our guest tonight is a perfect guest for us, our friend Yaron Brook of the Ayn Rand Institute, who believes in all of those things and more. Heartland covers key aspects of domestic policy through our centers: the Center on Budgets and Taxes, the Center for School Transformation, the center we call Consumers for Healthcare Choices, our Center on Climate and Environmental Policy, and our newest center, the Center for Constitutional Reform. I know that the Article 5 movement to save this country, our budget, our freedom through amending the Constitution through a convention of the states is something that's been picking up steam and being talked about all over Tea Party groups and groups all over the right. And there's a lot of different ideas out there, and our goal is to bring those groups together so we can come to a consensus and actually do something about it that we can all agree with. And we're really excited to be part of that movement, which really ramped up this year. And we are amazingly effective in our mission. You just have to ask the opponents of ours in the arena of ideas. They say that you're judged by your enemies, so just Google us and have a look. And if you like what you see tonight, whether here in person or watching online, I encourage you to look around at heartland.org, check out our blog, check out our daily podcasts on iTunes, check out our YouTube page. You'll see a lot more that is to your liking. And talk to a Heartland staffer about how you can browse and borrow books from our new library, which is the room over here off to the side of the event center here. That is, without a doubt, one of the best collections of books about liberty and free markets in and around Chicago, and it grows every single day. And in fact, if you have books that talk about freedom and liberty and free markets, and you'd like to donate them to the Heartland Institute, just find a Heartland staffer, and we'll make sure that we add those to this wonderful collection. Summer is also right around the corner, and so despite the chill in the air tonight, if you have any relatives of college age who would like to be immersed in a think tank and learn about the principles that we promote, then contact us. We have plenty of room in this beautiful new building and have a lot to share with young people, and also we'd love to share what they can contribute as well. And if all these things are important to you, we'd love to have your support here at the Heartland Institute so that we can keep informing the public and elected officials about the benefits of free markets and the importance of protecting our liberty, our free choices in all areas of public policy and life. And that brings us to our speaker tonight, Yaron Brook. He's the executive director of the Ayn Rand Institute, which you can visit at aynrand.org, and is a leading advocate of Rand's ideas. A former finance professor, he is among the world's smartest and most eloquent speakers on such topics as the causes of the financial crisis, the morality of capitalism, something that is not argued nearly enough, and ending the growth of the state. Born and raised in Israel, Yaron was a socialist until the age of 16. Then guess what happened? He read Atlas Shrugged. And despite his best efforts to poke holes in Rand's arguments, he just couldn't. And so he went on to become a student of Rand's philosophy, objectivism. He is the host of the Yaron Brook Show on Blog Talk Radio, and also heard every day on Saturdays at 4 p.m. right here in Chicago on AM 560 The Answer, and soon coming to Drive Time in Miami. He is the author or co-author of many books, including 2012's Free Market Revolution, How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government, and the book he wrote with Don Watkins that he is here to talk about tonight, Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Inequality. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage here at the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center, Yaron Brook.
Thank you. You know, achieving this is not easy to get to the point where you can have your own building and achieve that. Thank you all for coming tonight. I very much appreciate it. And, you know, Heartland and Ayn Rand Institute, there's a lot of synergy there. There's a lot do together or implicitly together, but we're all fighting for the cause of liberty in this country and really in the world as a whole. So we're told by the real authorities in the world today that the real problem in America and in the West more broadly is the problem of inequality. Authorities such as President Obama have told it. This is the issue of our time. And if you don't believe President Obama, the Pope said that this is the most important issue that we face, is the issue from an economic perspective, the issue of inequality. We are told that inequality is responsible for almost all of the social and economic ills that we experience today. You open up the New York Times, the Washington Post, I don't know about the Chicago papers, sorry I don't read them, but you know, the national papers, and they manage somehow to sneak in inequality into almost every story on every issue. Somehow the gap between the rich and the poor, that gap is too big and is destroying, fill in the blank, because it's destroying everything. Every year for the last decade or so, about 10 books have come out on the problem of inequality from the left. Significant books. And maybe the most important of those came out last year by, of course, a French economist. Who else would you expect, right? Thomas Piketty, whose book was translated finally into English and was published in the United States, became an instant bestseller, jumped up into the top of the... This is a big, thick economics book, instant bestseller, was reviewed by everybody, left, middle, and right. Almost everybody had very, very nice things to say about Thomas Piketty's book. I think they all realize this work is probably going to get him a Nobel Prize for economics. You can evaluate the value of a Nobel Prize in economics just by remembering who has won. People like the guy I call the former economist named Paul Krugman, Stiglitz, and many others. I mean, there's some good guys who got the Nobel Prize in economics. And of course, Paul Krugman got his Nobel Prize for economics. Maybe Donald Trump should remember this. He got it for a work that he did on free trade. And the value of free trade. Paul Krugman should read his Nobel Prize winning articles once in a while and remember that. Piketty's book is, again, not accidentally called Capital, or in German, Das Kapital, in the 21st century, right? So just an update of a famous book written quite a while ago. Although he denies being a Marxist, the book is infused with Marxist assumptions. And of course, his big conclusion in this book is, as he describes it, is that R is greater than G. always will be greater than G. And what R is the return on capital. So if you guys have some capital, you put it in a bank, you get R. And R is always going to be greater than the growth of the economy, which means that you, the owners of capital, will get more and more and more of the wealth because a greater percentage of the growth goes to you. And you will ultimately, if you have capital, will own all the capital, and everybody else will have no capital. Guess who made that prediction 160 years ago? Karl Marx, and it didn't work out. It didn't happen because, of course, it doesn't work that way. R cannot be greater than G forever. And the assumption in the book and elsewhere, and I'm not going to get in a whole critique of Piketty because it would take too long, but capital doesn't just grow. Just ask people who've made fortunes and lost them. It doesn't just grow automatically. You have to invest in getting your capital to grow. You don't just sit tight. But Piketty's book did fabulously well. Again, everybody wrote very positive critiques of it, including people on the right were very positive about it. It was somewhat sickening. The book is terrible. Luckily for us, Amazon keeps track of who actually reads the books that you buy. So I don't know if you know this. Talk about privacy. Here's a tidbit. If you buy a book on a Kindle, Amazon knows how much of the book you've read. The signal goes both ways. So Amazon actually publishes the least read book list of the year. Guess what number 1 was? Thomas Piketty's Capital. I was so happy. So, it sold a lot of copies, but at least nobody read it. So he made a lot of money all in the name of equality. Paul Krugman did a speech on the evils of inequality, and you know how much he charged for the speech? $250,000, one speech. Yeah. I'm expecting my check in the mail. Yeah, we could make fun of the hypocrisy all day long, but it's much too serious to treat it just as hypocrisy. So they make this argument, and of course, if this is such a big problem, we have to have solutions to the problem. And what Piketty proposes the solutions? Well, very simply, he says, we need to tax the wealthy. And he says we should start with an 80% marginal income tax rate. And he says, that's not that big of a deal. In America, we used to have a 90% marginal tax rate in the 1950s. Of course, he forgets to mention all the loopholes and the fact that nobody actually ever paid 90%. But he wants an 80% with no loopholes, 80% marginal income tax rate. But that's not enough. Because, remember, you've got that capital sitting over there, and it's growing at the rate of R. So even if you get no income, your capital is still growing. So we have to do something about that. So he wants a global 10% wealth tax. So, and why global? No tax havens. You can't put your money in Luxembourg or something. It's global 10% wealth tax. 10% every year. So every year we figure out what your wealth is, and we take 10%. Yeah, that's pretty nasty stuff. Pretty bad stuff. Think about your wealth is going to be shrinking unless R is greater than 10%. If you have a return of over 10%, a steady return of over 10% these days, let me know. Or maybe not. Like that land in Florida. People take this seriously. We might kid about it, we might be shocked, but people take this seriously. And Piketty says, it's not like this 10% wealth tax is going to generate enormous quantities of money, and we can take that money and give it to the poor and help the poor. He says it's not that much money, not in a global sense. Why does he want the 10% wealth tax then? I thought it was to help the poor. No, it's to shrink inequality. And we know, and this is important, we know that at the end of the day, the only way to shrink inequality is to do what? Is to penalize those who have it. Is to knock them down. And I'll keep returning to that because that is the whole point. The point is not to help the poor. It never has been, never will be. The point is to knock those who have down. So how do they sell this? How do they sell this idea of inequality? Because it's interesting. The American people have never bought into this idea that inequality is a bad thing. Survey after survey after survey show that for the most part, American people say, if somebody makes a lot of money, good for them. I don't envy my neighbor. I want to be my neighbor. I want it drives me. It gives me ambition to be successful. And that's been a theme in survey after survey. It's starting to change, which is very sad. But for many, many years, that was the idea. And this is a problem for the left because they're trying to use inequality to knock people down. And if they can't convince you that inequality is bad, what are they going to do? So they've decided that the theme can't be just envy. They have to come up with a story on why you should think inequality is a bad thing. And they come up with a number of different assumptions that are implicit in what they say, but that unfortunately people are starting to buy into, and you can see this. Of course, the guy popularizing all these arguments right now is wonderful Bernie Sanders, who every other sentence like a seether's, says something like those billionaires, millionaires and billionaires. That's that kind of a little tagline that he has for every paragraph that he starts. Millionaires and billionaires with a nasty expression on his face, as if they were the devil, right? And they're the problem that we have to deal with. So what are the kind of the assumptions that you're trying to make? I've already scared somebody off. Well, one of them is they try to convince us, or they don't even try to convince us. They assume in the way that they talk that wealth is social. They talk a lot about pies, And there's a pie out there. And imagine that you're sitting at home, or maybe your kids are sitting at home and you brought a pizza in, right? And there are 3 kids there. What are the kids expecting that you do with the pizza? How are you going to divide it? A third each, right? So the pie just shows up, and we're just there, so we expect it to be divided equal. Well, the way they talk about wealth, it's as if the pie is just there, the wealth is just there, right? And we are all sitting at the table, and we should all demand an equal share of that pie. What are they ignoring? Somebody needs to make it, but it's more than just that somebody needs to make it. We don't make a collective pie. I don't make your pies. You don't make my pies. We each make our own pies, and they're ours. But what they want is to take all the pies and put them all together and pretend that there's a collective pie. But there is no collective pie. There is no American wealth. I have to say something about Donald Trump. Trump talks about we're losing to the Chinese. I mean, America doesn't trade with China. America does not trade with China. You might be trading with China. Walmart might be trading with China. And they're not trading with China. They're trading with some Chinese company. Countries don't trade. Individuals trade. People trade. And barriers to that trade are always wrong. I don't care if they cross national borders, state borders, local borders. Barriers are wrong to the trade between people. And when you trade among each other, is there a loser? No, it's a win-win. And the same, if you abstract away and say Americans who trade with Chinese, they're no losers. Quite the contrary. This is an aside, but think about what we do with China, right? We get stuff, and they get pieces of paper with dollar signs on them. What would you rather have? I'll take stuff all day. All day, right? Anybody want my pieces of paper? I want to get rid of this stuff. Gold, maybe? Right? They get pieces of paper, and what do they have to do with a piece of paper? Bring them back to the United States to invest them because they don't want to be stuck with them. Not with the Fed at zero, not with dollar at 0% interest rate. So they come back here to buy our stuff. That's why a Chinese company is bidding $14 billion to buy Starwood hotels. Right? They're paying a huge amount. Why? Because they want stuff, not dollars. So, I mean, that's just an aside about the ridiculous nature of making claims about trade. But, so the pie is not a collective pie. And we should never talk about a collective pie. Just like we should never talk about a collective trade. The pie, you make it, or you make it, or you make it. If we make it, then you can't just take it. Then American people don't buy into that. But if it's ours, they want fairness, which is we can divide it equal. So I think it's incumbent on us, the defenders of liberty and freedom, to defend individualism here, right? This is individualism versus collectivism. Collectivism believes that the individual doesn't count. What you produce isn't yours. It is the groups. It is the collectives, automatically. We must defend the idea of individual pies and against the collective pie. So that's one of the kind of things they sneak in there, the idea of collective wealth. We have this wealth. America produces so much. If we only divided among everybody, there'd be nobody poor. No, America doesn't produce anything. We produce stuff. Second, as part of this, they have to work to convince us that we don't actually make the pie. And President Obama did a very good job of this. You remember? You didn't build that. So Americans don't buy typically into this idea that wealth is social, that wealth is collective. So we have to find a way to undercut America's belief in this individualism. And one way to do that is say, look, you guys drive on the highway, that was built with taxpayer money. You go to public schools, you owe it to your teachers. You have employees. They built it just as much as you built it. So individuals don't bake pies. It's groups that bake pies. It's collectives that bake pies. And since you've taken a bigger piece of the pie, you need to share it. And all we're doing, we the government, is helping you share it. It's what you should be doing. And the way we're going to help you share it is taking it away from you and divvying it up. 80%, 10% wealth tax, big deal. Now, what's the answer to that? We all indeed do have employees. Right? What do? We pay them based on how productive they are. They're compensated already. Indeed, without the entrepreneur who's building and making it, there would be no employees. Entrepreneurs come first, employees come second in terms of the sequence of events. I like to use a biotech company as an example. You know, the money comes first, the capitalist comes first, the entrepreneur second. Because if you think about it, you have an idea, but you can't do anything with the idea until somebody is willing to risk their capital to fund that idea. And what does it mean to fund the idea? It means to pay salaries for people in a biotech company for 10 years before you see a dime, and you might never see anything because the risks are so high. Are the employees willing not to take a salary for 10 years? No. Right? No. You're creating that opportunity for them to have a job securely for 10 years. That's the beauty of the capitalist. That's why he gets the returns that he gets. And he builds it. He has the vision. He has the risk tolerance. He's willing to actually do it. An entrepreneur has the idea, is willing to organize the firm. So you do build it. Now, but what about the school teacher? Anybody have a school teacher that really impacted their lives and changed their life significantly? Yeah. I didn't, but I know people that have. You should say thank you to them. And if you have a lot of money, you know, it's fine if you write them a check. That would be a nice gesture. Right? But the state has no role here. We have no role here. If you have somebody who's been very important in your life, find them. Say thank you. That would be nice. That's justice. It's a nice act. But it doesn't diminish what you've done since. Lots of people have good teachers. Some take advantage of the good education they got. Some do not. What about the roads, the highways? Bill Gates uses those highways. Well, who the hell paid for them? Before you have a highway, you have to have taxes. And who do you tax? Business people who create wealth. So they, in a sense, in the sequence of events, they create the wealth before you get the highway. So they paid for those highways. It's not something that just sprung out of nowhere and was created and is there, and now they're using it. They were taxed in order to get it. And they continue to be taxed in order to get it. So, now, I mean, you do build it. It is choices that individuals make that make the wealth that they have possible. There are circumstances, there are better, some people have luck and everything else, but at the end of the day, to be successful requires your effort, your focus, your mind exercised. So, okay, so you did build that. So what else do they try? Well, I mean, the obvious one, which to this audience I don't have to go into, but in colleges you have to really explain this, is that they believe that, or they don't quite explain this, but they implicitly assume that we live in a zero-sum world. President Obama many times says, you know, they're getting more at your expense. So they are, the wealthy, their wealth comes by taking from somebody else. Now again, I assume that at a Heartland event, I don't have to explain that the world is not a zero-sum game. Anybody who with a little bit of memory knows that the world cannot be a zero-sum game, or who knows history knows that, because 250 years ago we were all poor. Now, by those standards, nobody's poor, and we didn't steal it from anybody. Right? Unless there were Martians somewhere that, you know, somebody knows about that. I don't. We couldn't have stolen it from anybody. So it's not a zero-sum game either. So they're trying to convince us of things that are obviously wrong. But why is this so, why are they still being so successful? Because they are. They're being incredibly successful. And indeed, they are eroding the American commitment to this idea of ambition and to this idea of respecting wealth and the idea of respecting people who've made a lot of money. The left is winning this battle. And I think part of it is, not all of it, but part of it is that the right doesn't answer them. So when Rand Paul was asked in a presidential debate whether he thought inequality was a problem, he basically said yes, but capitalism is a better solution for it. That's wrong. Does anybody here know if in capitalism inequality grows or shrinks relative to where we are today? Nobody knows that. We have no idea. I don't know. I don't know if it goes up, down. My guess is inequality expands. Why? Because the rich get much, much richer. Imagine if Bill Gates wasn't made to feel guilty for making $70 billion and he kept on working. Who knows how rich he could have become? Who knows how rich he could have become? So at the top, you get expansion. Now, I think we probably all agree that at the bottom, people would be much better off under capitalism. But the gap, I mean, my response to the gap question, which is the inequality question, is who cares? Who cares? It's irrelevant to anything. Now, let's be clear. There are problems in America, right? We all know this. There are problems of rich people who got rich not by making stuff, not by producing, not by creating values, but by manipulating government, by using force. That's what manipulating government is. We call it cronyism, right? That's a problem. Not a problem of inequality, a problem of cronyism. There's a problem on the low end. There are poor people who don't have as many opportunities as we believe they should and could have. And certainly that they had, let's say, 100 years ago. And they're stuck. And they really, even if though they're ambitious and they're hardworking, they don't seem to be able to rise up and improve themselves. But why is that? What's that? Well, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I would say it's all the programs trying to help inequality are keeping them down. It's minimum wage. And here in Chicago, you want to raise it to 15. Yeah, you want to increase youth unemployment. I get it, all right. But that's what it does. You raise the minimum wage. All you're doing is pricing more people out of a job. And you're denying them that first step on that ladder, that first job, which is so crucial. Licensing laws. I mean, particularly at the low end of the licensing spectrum, like in California, you need a license to shampoo hair. Who does that hurt? You need a license in Chicago to open a nail salon. Who does that hurt? Yeah, you're denying entrepreneurs the entry. In New Zealand, it takes half a day to open a business. It's a little form, you submit it and you go and open your business. It's taken days in the United States. We've dropped way down on the list in terms of how easy it is to open a business. That hurts entrepreneurs that are starting out. And not only does it hurt their ability to create wealth, it hurts their ability to hire people who might be at those you know, those poverty levels and are going to give it their entry-level jobs. And you can go on and on. Maybe the most important of all of these, and maybe the most controversial, is education. We all know how important education is to rise up and to create your own opportunities. But and who is the provider of the product of education? Our government. We have government schools. And what is the quality of that education? Awful, particularly to poor people. Yeah, I mean, if you're in the upper middle class, the public schools are okay. I don't think they're great, but they're okay, right? But in the poor neighborhoods, they are awful. They are awful, right? So everything the government touches supposedly to help the poor makes them worse. And I would argue welfare is the same. When you hand people a check, you're discouraging them from work, you're telling them they're no good, you're destroying their self-esteem, you're destroying their ability to have pride in taking care of themselves and of their family. And you're destroying their lives. You're doing much more than just destroying their ability to have income. You're destroying their lives. So at the bottom, we have problems. And what the income inequality guys want to do is multiply those problems by creating even more laws and restrictions that are going to hold people back and institutionalize them into poverty. In the middle class, we have problems. There's a certain stagnation of the middle class. I don't think it's anywhere near how much they talk about. I don't know how many, well, this is a group that actually remembers the 70s. I have a sense, right? 70s sucked. There was no iPhones. I mean, think of the standard of living in the 70s. If you actually look at standard of living, not an income, not any of the numbers that can be easily fudged or easily manipulated, but actually look at the quality and standard of living in the 1970s versus today. The kind of cars we drove, the size of our homes, and I was going to say the speed of our computers, but we didn't have computers in the 70s, right? Nothing. And now we have a supercomputer in our pockets, right? This is more powerful than the computer that sent man to the moon. Every piece of human knowledge is on here. I mean, not every, but a lot, right? There's almost nothing that you can't find on your phone. I like to say, I mean, every piece of music ever composed. Think of the value that that gives you, right? We used to have to go hunt in record stores for stuff. Vinyls, remember those? You had to clean them. Oh my God. That was the 70s. This is so much better, right? Standard of living is much higher for the middle class than it was back then. But it's not as high as it could be. We've got slow economic growth in this country. And as a consequence of slow economic growth, the middle class, well, it's shrinking. It's interesting because if you actually look at the numbers, it's shrinking because more people in the middle class have gone up than people have gone down. But it shouldn't be. More poor people should be joining the middle class. The middle class should be expanding and should be better off in a much more substantial way. But that's because the economy is growing at 1%. But why is the economy growing at 1%? This is not hard stuff. When you control, when you regulate, people don't innovate, they don't grow, they don't invest, they don't hire. That's what's killing this economy. Yeah. It'd be nice if somebody on the right, one of the presidential candidates, actually talked about regulation as a job killer, as an income killer, as a wealth killer. Much more important than their tax schemes. Much more important than their tax schemes are regulations and spending. And of course, they won't touch spending because that would, God forbid, mean that they had to say, we need to get rid of Medicare. It's bankrupting this country. Because it is. And it is, and it's an unbelievably immoral scheme. Unbelievable. It's a huge wealth transfer from young people to old people on a scale that the world has never seen, and particularly with the baby boomers now. I guess you guys and me. We're gonna live at large at the expense of our children and grandchildren. We're going to have hip replacement surgeries that cost us zero, end-of-life treatments that extend our life forever at the cost of our kids and grandkids, and it cost us zero. And for every dollar you put into Medicare, people say, oh, but I paid into the system. You'll spend $4 at least for every dollar you put in. Where did the other $3? First of all, the dollar you put in was spent a long time ago. And where did the dollars come from? Your kids and grandkids. And that means their taxes are going to have to be 3 to 4 times higher than yours, which is not sustainable, so the whole system's going to collapse. But they won't talk about that stuff. So the real problems that we have, and they're real, all have to do with government policies, with government restrictions on our freedoms, with government spending, with government policies. All types of policies that the left wants to double up on. Now, what is their motivation? Why are they doing this? Because, you know, they're not stupid. They're too smart to not know that what they're proposing is a disaster. At least somewhere back there. I don't believe it. I think that two reasons. One in the more palatable one, then I get to the less palatable one, is that they hold a philosophy. They hold a set of ideas that really believes that equality is the standard of justice, of morality, of goodness. They really believe this. And, you know, this has a long history of these ideas of equality as the standard. This is how we got communism. And there's still people around the world today, many people, unfortunately, who say, oh, no, communism is great in theory. It's just, you know, human beings, what can you do in practice? It doesn't work. No, communism is downright evil as an ideology and in practice. Evil, not bad, evil. And indeed, I believe that the idea of equality of outcome, equality of any sort when it involves outcome, I'll talk in a minute about the appropriate equality, is evil. You know, there's a group that was more serious about equality than even the communists. And they all studied in Paris, of course, under the great existentialist philosophers, Sartre and Camus and all those guys. And they took their philosophy very seriously and said, we're going to implement real equality. We're going to actually do it. And they went back home and they managed to take over the government. And they said, we're going to do this. The first thing they noticed, right, is some people lived in the city, and city life was easier and more comfortable and everything, and other people lived in the countryside, and they were dirt poor. So they said, that's not fair, right? That's not equal. So what do? You kick everybody out of the cities. So they emptied the cities. They literally marched everybody out of the cities into the countryside. But then they noticed something, too, that even in the countryside, people are not equal. Some people foraged for food better than others foraged for food. They banned foraging. So people started starving. They banned good farming practices because they wanted to make sure everybody had the same huge food shortages in a very fertile country. But still people were not equal. Some people were smart and some people were not. Some people could read, some people were not. What do? There's only one way to get people to truly be equal. That is to kill them. If you had glasses, you were shot. If you could read, you were shot. If you had an education, you were shot. Of a population of about 5 million people, almost 2 million people were shot. This is Cambodia. This is the Khmer Rouge. This is the killing fields of Cambodia. This is not theory. This is practice. This is people doing this in the real world, trying to really get equal. Equality demands violence. We're not equal. Look around the room. We're all different. Great. Isn't that a good thing? Right? Imagine everybody was like me. I mean, it would be awful, be boring, be terrible. This is fun. We're all producing different things, doing different things. It's good that we're different. But when you try to fight metaphysics, when you try to fight reality, only death and destruction could be the result. And that's what the whole equality movement ultimately comes down to. But they hold it as a philosophical ideal. They still do. Even though none of them will say, oh, we really want equality. We want more equality. And then you ask them, how much more? Just more. We will democratically decide how much. But they never tell you how much because they know what their ideal is. They know they can't get there. They know they're too afraid even to admit that they will get there. But that's the standard. It's like a platonic ideal that's floating up here, detached from reality. And so that is what we need to challenge. We need to challenge that idea of equality. And to find a couple of chapters in the book, that's exactly what we do. We take on the philosophical case of equality, which was popularized, if you know the American philosopher Rawls. Rawls, in his theory of justice, popularizes this notion of egalitarianism, of equality, as the standard of the good. And that has to be debunked, it has to be destroyed, it has to be smashed. Because it's evil. It's wrong. Now, that brings me to my second reason why I think they hold this, right? First, they have a philosophy, but how can they hold on to this philosophy? Now, here I'm talking about the intellectuals. I'm not talking about many people who get conned into this. Why do the intellectuals hold these ideas? And this is tough, right? They hold these ideas because they hate us. They are motivated by hate. You know the kids who like to build towers with blocks? And then the kids who like to knock them down? They're the kids who like to knock them down. It's called nihilism. Fundamentally, behind the intellectuals of the left is a nihilistic tendency. It's hatred, what Ayn Rand called hatred of the good for being the good. It's hatred of life, hatred of their own life, hatred of the people around them, hatred of success, resentment of success. A 10% wealth tax that doesn't actually help the poor. What are you motivated by? Hatred of the rich, hatred of the wealth, hatred of the success. And for good people, people in this room, it's hard to conceive of somebody motivated by hatred. And that's why I think we don't fight as much as we could fight. We don't stand up to them as much as we should stand up, because we sometimes think, oh, they're good people, they're just confused. No, some of them are downright bad people. Their motivations are bad, their ideas are bad, and how they execute it, it's bad. And what it leads to is bad. And we need to recognize that, confront it, challenge it. And what we need is the alternative. And what is the alternative to the whole inequality debate? It's another form of equality. Actually, the only legitimate form of equality. The Founding Fathers in the Declaration of Independence said that all men are created equal. But what did they mean? Not equality of outcome. Not even equality of opportunity. There is no such thing. Think about it. There are no two people with the same opportunity. No. Founding Fathers went deeper. Because what is the Declaration of Independence? What are they talking about in the Declaration of Independence? They're talking about rights. They're talking about freedom. They're talking about liberty. All men are created equal. All men have the same rights. We're all equal in rights. We're all equal in liberty. Each one of us has a right to his own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Each one of us as an individual, no matter, and here they were inconsistent, unfortunately, in their actions, but no matter the color of our skin, no matter the race, no matter the religion, or anything else, we are equal. We're equal rights, equal liberties, equal before the law. The state must treat us as equals. That's what it means. And here they meant when the state treats us, it means the state must defend our rights, because that's the only role of the state. Defend our rights equally, no matter who we are. And that's the positive message. Because every time you try to correct the so-called problem of inequality, you violate somebody's rights. There is no way to achieve equality of outcome or of opportunity without treating people differently before the law. What we must fight for is equality of rights, equality of liberty, equality before the law, equality of what makes us human. Right? And I think if we know what we stand for, if we have principles that we identify and we know what motivates the other side, I still believe that we can win. Thank you all. All right. I think we've got time for questions.
Yes, we do. Please raise your hand, and I'll bring a microphone over to you. And please identify yourself so that Yaron knows who he's speaking to.
Larry Greenberg, and the classic experiment that the teachers do with their students is no matter what you do, we all get a C. And people object to that. And so why do we still have this indoctrination, especially among the young, who would object to this in their classes? Of course, maybe they all want to get the A for not doing anything.
But remember, we're changing even that, right? So put aside the classroom a minute. I'll get back to the classroom. But we have now sports leagues for kids where they don't keep score. There's actually commercial on television where the father's got this trophy that he just got, and a trophy that says participant, and you can hear him thinking, saying, wait a minute, participant, we won. What's this? And he rips off the participant and he writes in, winner or something like that. But we encourage that, even in sports, which is the most hierarchical historically, right? We admire success. Even in the classroom, do you know that at Stanford, almost nobody ever gets a C? And if you're a professor and you fail a kid, you better have a good explanation to the administrators. This is Stanford for why you failed a kid. Right? A's and B's, that's the grades at Stanford. There are no C, D students. Now they're smart, but they're still C, D students, right? So we've even shrunk that. But you see, they also treat wealth differently. And this goes back to the whole Marxist, the whole perception of how wealth is created. You didn't build that. And we treat wealth differently. We have no problem with LeBron James making, I don't know, $100 million, whatever he makes, right? He makes a huge amount of money. No problem. Nobody ever complains about how much money LeBron James makes. But we complain bitterly about how much CEOs make. Or how much hedge fund guys, God forbid, hedge fund guys make, right? Partially because we know what it is that LeBron James does. We've played basketball. We know we're no good. We know he's much better. And we actually get entertained by him, right? Some of us, those of us who like basketball. We have no concept what a CEO does and how hard it is and the kind of effort and the kind of skill that is required. Never mind a hedge fund manager. And what his so-called contribution is to the economy is so abstract that it's hard for people to understand. Basketball is easy. So wealth is much easier to complain about, and even there, Americans resent it, right? But what worries me is, I think 90% of all young people voting in the Democratic primaries are voting Bernie Sanders. I think it's starting to work. I think it's starting to chip away. The fact, see, the left took over the educational institutions about 100 years ago, and they've slowly becoming more and more radical, and more dominant, and we've felt the consequence already, but now I have the sense that it's really getting to a tipping point in the sense of what they've done to our kids and our grandkids.
We have a question here online, and I'll go over to that table in a moment.
Okay.
This is from, in the chat room, CP Milken. Not everybody here was a fan, by the way. We're going to get some challenges, which I know you're going to enjoy. You're going to get some challenges here for online.
It's boring if I don't get challenged. But this is, I hope he's not related to the Milken.
I have no comment on that.
Okay.
Cannot tell.
Okay.
All right. Yaron speaks about economic equality, but given that education is a right of every child, shouldn't government ensure that economic benefit is equally applied?
Well, I mean, I challenge the premise of education being a right of every child. Education cannot be a right. You have a right to act on behalf of your own life. You have a right to be free. Rights mean freedom of action. It means that nobody can use coercion against you. You cannot have a right to my stuff. You cannot have a right to other people's lives or property or stuff, because that means they don't have a right to it. So saying that a kid has a right to education means that he has a right to the time of the teacher, my tax money, my money, who he steals through taxes, in order to subsidize his education. You can't have a right to health care. You can't have a right to a job. You can't have a right to education. You can't have a right to stuff. When the Founding Fathers talk about rights, they talk about freedoms, freedoms of action. You have a right to pursue the values necessary to make your life a success. Not to get the values, to pursue the values. Right? So I challenge that premise. But what was the second part of it? That as a consequence, everybody should have equal something? Yeah, but let me just say, riff on education, right? Education is unbelievably important, right? The fact that you don't have a right to it doesn't make it not important. It's the most important thing we do with our kids. So I always ask my audiences, if they want to mail a letter and they want to make sure that it gets to the other side on time, do they use the post office or FedEx? Yeah, everybody wants FedEx or UPS, right? Nobody's going to give it to the post office. So then ask them, why do you feel comfortable dropping off your kids every morning at the post office to have them play with your kid's brain? Because it's the same thing. Post office owned by the government. The public schools are government schools. I don't trust the bureaucrats with my mail. I certainly don't trust the bureaucrats with my kids. So if you care about education, you want it to be privatized. You want the state out of the business of education. We want competition and innovation and people, instead of thinking about the next stupid little app on the iPhone, to think about how to create the next great educational product for kids. I want to see that entrepreneurial vibrancy in education. And people say, oh, but how will poor people afford it? You in Chicago had a wonderful teacher called Marva Collins in the inner city of Chicago. And her kids all went to college, right? And she was very affordable. Parents wrote checks. And she gave one of the best educations ever in the country. It's possible. Education does not have to be expensive. And just I'll end with this. Chicago public schools spend $15,000 per child a year. The Archdiocese of Chicago spends for the same children $7,500 a year. Now, I don't advocate this because I'm not big in religious schools, but you could shut down the Chicago schools, pay the Archdiocese to educate every school in the system, and save $7,500 per child. And we haven't created a competitive market and a real innovation which would drive prices even further down. Yeah, go ahead.
Identify yourself.
Yeah, Henry Kowalczyk. I agree with you that we lost the battle. Otherwise, when we're talking about the young generation, they are right now openly for socialism, which was basically unthinkable, let's say, 50 years ago. But my question is, why did we lose the battle? And if we ask whom to blame, should you look at the mirror? Because basically, institutions as yours, as Harland, they are trying to educate the society, and I believe your book is great. I have to acknowledge I didn't buy it because I don't think I need to be convinced. And the question then is, how many people which could benefit from your book will actually not only buy it, because let's say I'll buy the book and give it to my son who went through the educational system and he could use it, but you know, I look at his shelf and there was Atlas Shrugged on the shelf, it didn't help him. So otherwise, what we have the problem that something is wrong when it comes to convincing people that they are getting into the wrong path. And you notice my accent, I grew up in Poland. And I met many people who saw that system collapsing. There were some family members, close friends. And I remember one guy, not trying to make it short, who was hardcore socialist, believing in it. And there was during those solidarity period after the martial law was established, and we were living close to that coal mine, Wujek, when they killed those miners at the time. And I remember the day or two I was standing in front of the mine, and I hear someone in the back of my head whispering, "Those assholes, they did it." And I look at that, and this is that my uncle who is that hardcore socialist. The point is, a month later, he visited me and said, "Henry, you have to understand, those are the errors which are made on the process because the socialist is superior." Okay, so the question is, where did we lost it, and what needs to be done? Because what is done is not sufficient.
Obviously, right? We're losing, so it's not sufficient. I don't think enough of us have gone to war. I don't think enough of us are engaged in the battle. So yes, look in the mirror, all of us, right? How much are you fighting? Whether by supporting Heartland or the Ayn Rand Institute, or whether by going out there and speaking for yourself and getting really passionate about this and trying to advocate for the right ideas. But I think there's a deeper issue, and that is that too many on the right have not gone deep enough. Because why are people attracted to socialism? Why are people attracted to these egalitarian ideas? I think the issues are philosophical. And we have to challenge them philosophically. The ethic that says, and this is, my talk on the morality of capitalism, which I'm sure some of you have heard, it goes to this point. The ethic that makes socialism possible is the ethics of otherism, altruism. which says that your purpose of your life is to serve other people, is to live for other people. That's what Augustine Comte, believed in. And our religious leaders teach us this. Our philosophers teach us this. Our mothers teach us this. That is incompatible with capitalism and freedom. It's incompatible. We have to have an ethic that says, no, my moral responsibility to my life is to make the most of my life, to live the best life that I can live. And what that means, is a whole other discussion. But it doesn't mean lying, stealing, cheating, and being a jerk, right? But unless we challenge the prevailing morality, unless we challenge the prevailing philosophy, we will lose. And I've been saying this for years, and I've been encouraging my pro-liberty friends to join the battle on the morality of capitalism. The left owns the moral high ground. And then the right tries to play on their courts. And we know from basketball, the home court advantage is huge. Right? We're a minority, and we've given up the most important part of it. Right? We're playing with a fewer. Yeah, I shouldn't use the basketball analogy. It's going nowhere. No, but they are winning because they dominate philosophy. They dominate social thinking at the deeper level. We've had very few social thinkers. We've had economists, lots of economists. We've had very few social thinkers, and we're uncomfortable talking about things like morality, talking about things like philosophy. They're not. They have no problem citing Rawls. And you know what our side does? This drives me nuts, and some of you know this guy. I mean, he's a nice guy, so this isn't personal. But there's the token right winger at Brown University, right? And so he's supposed to be out there fighting for liberty against all these leftists. So he writes a book, which he spends years on writing, right? And the whole thesis of the book is taking John Rawls, who is responsible for all this egalitarian nonsense, and merging him with Hayek, and saying that actually they're the same thing, and here's an egalitarian, libertarian perspective, which is complete. You've sold out completely. And this book was, people raved about it. People on the right, and the libertarians and conservatives had forums, and they talked about how wonderful it is that we can embrace Rawls. No, Rawls needs to be called for what he is, garbage. He's a bad guy. It's not good ideas. And if we don't call him out on that, if we don't challenge really bad ideas, the bad ideas will win. If all we talk about is economics, we come across as superficial. What about the soul? What about morality? What about what's important to people? And it is what's important to people. People want to be just. People want to be moral. People want to be good. They also want to be rich, but much more importantly, they want to be moral. Morality is where the action is. And we have to defend morality.
I listen to you on the radio all the time.
Oh, good. It's always good to know somebody's listening.
My name is Susan Duboff. I live in Mount Prospect.
Hi, Susan.
I would challenge this detractor of yours who just tweeted something by saying that education is a right. Because if it is a right, then why are children required by law to go? Regulation. Their parents will be put in jail, fined if they do not go, more regulation. These children who try to secure an education that they see as a freedom and liberty in charter schools are pounded down, and so I would like this particular person to even explain why education, how this person sees education as a right.
Sure. No, absolutely. And let me say something positive about education, because there's actually glimmers of hope out there. The state of Nevada, of all places, has passed a law that creates what are called education saving accounts. And this is the greatest innovation I've heard in this field. What the state does is they take the amount of money they would spend on your child in a public school. In Nevada, it's only $5,400, much cheaper than Chicago. Surprise, surprise. And they take that money and they put it into, if you don't want to send your kid to a public school, they put it into a tax-free account. You can then use that money for any educational product you want. It can be homeschool, it can be a private school, it can be online education. You can roll the money over from year to year. And if you have money left over, you can use it to pay for college. I mean, this is a revolution, right? Because imagine if you're a private school entrepreneur, Nevada's the place to go because the people have money, because the state has put this money into their account. So it's not completely privatized education. It's not the state completely out. But the state is out of the decision-making in terms of what schools are good, what schools are bad, what curriculum's right. They are funding it, which is a far less evil than the actual decision on the school system. So I think this is a terrific innovation. It actually comes out of the Goldwater Center. They came up with the idea. But in Arizona, right? You guys thought of it?
Well, we were writing about this in the 1980s, and not just us, but a lot of people.
Okay, so Heartland Institute, even better, because I know these guys much better than I know Goldwater. So from now on, I'm going to give you guys credit. But no, people have been writing, and others. And the first implementation, I think, was in Arizona. But what happened in Arizona is the state only allowed it for disabled kids or kids with learning disabilities. The innovation in Nevada is it's universal. They're allowing it for all kids. I mean, I think this is terrific, really terrific.
By the way, C.P. Milken online was a fan of yours. It was just an interesting question about education and equality. He made that clear in the chat later with an
Okay,
LOL and a smiley face.
Good.
So
Well,
there you
maybe
go.
he is related to Mike Milken. Mike Milken's is a hero of mine. So, and you can ask me about that if you want. But
Okay, Robert, stand, please.
Sure. I'm Bob Angelica. I live in the Chicago area. Since you mentioned the Chicago Public Schools, I have to tell you something I saw in the Chicago Tribune today in the Health and Family section. Chicago Tribune reporter suggests since Procter & Gamble is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, it ought to give free tampons to women in the Chicago public school system, since so many are low-income people.
I mean, why not, right? I mean, once we're distributing people's wealth, let's distribute people's tampons. I mean, it makes complete sense. If you didn't build that, if the wealth is not yours, if the pie is social, then all our goods, and then now it's just a question of how the central planner, the philosopher king, views the best use of anybody's goods. You know? I mean, we get that, right? That's not that different than Kilo. I think your house would be better as a swimming pool. There's much more social utility in a swimming pool than it is in your house. Let's vote on it. Yeah, okay.
All right, if you have a question, please put your hand up. I'm going to read another one from online. This is from Legend RE007. Hello.
All right.
Question, economist Robert H. Frank cites evolutionary psychology. He says, even if production is a positive-sum game, social status is zero-sum. If you're the richest and most prestigious, I can't be. There's no question mark, but I think he'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't buy into the social status argument. I don't think it's important. I don't think that rational people care about their social status. I think people do care in the world we live in today because they're encouraged to care. They're trained to care. They're educated to care. I don't think it's in our genes. I think that's, I won't say it's nonsense because I'm not a biologist, but it doesn't make any sense to me that we're born with an instinct to social justice, to social hierarchy. Social hierarchies, the idea of the importance of social hierarchies is embedded in us by the people at the top who want us to treat them with respect, to give them our money, to lay our lives out for them. I mean, who has an interest in telling you, this goes back to morality, who has an interest in telling you that you should not be self-interested, that you should serve the needs of the group, that you should serve the needs of society, that you should serve the needs of the public good, right? The common welfare. I hate those terms. They mean nothing. They mean nothing. So somebody has to somehow have to channel the public, channel the community, channel the tribe into telling us what is good. Guess who that is? It's Ayn Rand had a famous essay where she used Attila and the witch doctor. And every culture has an Attila and the witch doctor. Attila is the political leader, the witch doctor is the religious leader. The political leader says, I know what the group needs. But don't live for yourself, live for the group and listen to me because I'm the only guy who knows what the group is. And if that becomes too hard, I've got the witch doctor who is communing with the spirit of the common good. And he will tell you what it is. And that's how you maintain control. That's how you maintain power. And so the whole social hierarchy is a great way for the people on top to maintain control. If you read Confucius, the whole idea of Confucius is the relationship between people in the hierarchy of the social order. Who has an interest in maintaining that hierarchy and making sure that you at the bottom don't stick your head up too high? The people at the top, they're the ones who support this. They're the ones who promote it. So I know evolutionary behavioral biology, economics, all this stuff is very popular. I don't buy it, and I don't think it's good science. And you could tell the same story with a completely different, you can tell a completely different story for the same result that makes a lot more sense.
Hey, I'm James Carey, and I'm from the Milwaukee area. Yaron, I know you actually just mentioned it in your comment there, but I guess just comment on taking it like one step deeper down the structure for morality, in terms of actually defining how we use the words. For instance, when you talk about selfishness, for instance, something that people misconstrue based on our perception of what that word means in morality, and how that's important to the overall debate that we're talking about in terms of capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, the people who want us to live for the sake of others, for the group, for the collective, have a strong incentive to present the world in this way. There are two alternatives. You can live for others and be good, or you can be a SOB. That's it. Those are the only two alternatives. Because selfishness means, you look it up in the dictionary, exploiting other people. So you can either be exploiting other people or sacrifice to them. Those are the only two alternatives presented in morality. Now, Ayn Rand says, wait a minute. I can live for myself without exploiting other people or having other people exploit me. Which is to live rationally by my own means, again, without expecting other people to sacrifice for me, but without me sacrificing for other people. Trading, win-win relationships. So selfish means taking care of self. Well, how do you take care of self? By thinking, by being rational, by thinking of the consequences of the actions that you take, by trading. Trade is win-win. Not by exploiting, not by abusing. Lying, stealing, cheating don't work. They're not, try them sometime if you don't believe me, but they don't. We've all tried lying. It's stupid. It's a stupid strategy for success, right? I just asked Bernie Madoff. I knew it was a Bernie. Just ask Bernie Madoff, right, how well the lying worked out for him. And not after he was caught. That's obvious. Before he was caught. Before he was caught, he says now that he's happier in prison than he was before he was caught. Because he still doesn't have to bear the burden of not being able to look people in the eye, not being able to talk to his family, because he's lying to them constantly. That's awful. There's nothing worse in life. There might be a few things worse in life, but that's one of the worst things. But I don't know, most of you seem, there's a lot of people my age or older here. I find myself barely remembering what I did last week. I'm busy, so maybe that's part of it. Age is part of it. Imagine now I lied about what I did last week. I'd have to remember two things. I can't even do one. But it's not even two things. Because you have to remember what you did last week, what you didn't do, the lie, who you told the lie to, who you didn't tell the lie to, why you told the lie to these people and not to those people. It's too complicated. It's such a waste of time and resources. You've got an incredibly precious machine up here. A machine is way too simplistic a way to think about it. A brain. To stuck it up and guck it up with garbage is the worst thing one could imagine if you're self-interested. If you're self-interested, what you want is to have a pristine, clean engine that runs smoothly. And in computers we used to say garbage in, garbage out. Same thing with the mind. You put in garbage there, it'll integrate it and create garbage that comes out the other side.
I have a two-part question. My name is Sutej Kapoor. I live in Lamont here. Thoroughly enjoying your talk. There was an article Paul Krugman wrote an editorial in the New York Times a couple days ago, which I know we all take with a huge sack of salt. But he said something that I'd like you to comment on. He was reacting to something Paul Ryan said, and he said, look, we know trickle-down economics does not work. And there was, he actually had it hyperlinked. And so I was just wondering if you know the research on that. And my number two question is, this thing about minimum wage relative to inequality, they all cite these two economists in Princeton who did this study that said, well, if you increase the minimum wage a little bit, it doesn't really hurt anything, so why not increase the minimum wage? So Krugman and minimum wage.
Yeah, so Krugman cites that study often, the Princeton study, when he talks about minimum wage. So the first one was trickle-down economics. I mean, it's a stupid term. What trickles down exactly? There's nothing trickling down. We're trading. But the fact is that you cannot, there is no work to be done until there's an entrepreneur and a capitalist. And in that sense, every worker is dependent on the existence of entrepreneurs and capitalists to create jobs for those workers. It's the exact opposite of Marx. Marx thinks they're workers and then entrepreneurs and capitalists to exploit those workers. No, the workers don't exist until there's an entrepreneur and a capitalist. We're the workers. They're out in subsistence farming, dying. Now, we can't see that in America today, but you can see it in Asia. Entrepreneurs and capitalists create businesses, and then in China, for example, and then all these people come in from the countryside, from where they're barely surviving and starving often, and they come and get jobs. The jobs don't exist until the entrepreneur and the capitalist create those jobs. Now their standard of living goes up because as they become more productive, the people who came in from the fields, their wages go up, their standard of living go up. Now, did that trickle down? I don't know. It flooded down. There's a massive flood down. But it is true. And it's more than that. If you really take this to the next level beyond economics, knowledge is trickled down. But it isn't trickled down. It's a flood. Right? We all stand on the shoulder. We all stand on the shoulders of Newton. Right? Where would the world be without Newton? He contributed to the world a gazillion times more than I will ever contribute to the world. Right? I don't resent that, but I'm a beneficiary of the fact that Newton and Aristotle and John Locke and the founding fathers existed. But it's the same thing in business. We're all beneficiaries, and all the workers of the world are beneficiaries of the fact that we had a Carnegie, a Mellon, a J.P. Morgan, and today a Bill Gates and a Steve Jobs and a Sam Walton. So I don't like it. It's not a trickle. There's nothing without them. There's nothing without them. Without the entrepreneurs, there is no economy. And you look around the world and you look at places that don't have entrepreneurs and you say, there's nothing there. Now, we'll always have entrepreneurs if we have freedom. Because there's always some percentage of us who are eager to do more, achieve more, take risks, be more successful. So you need freedom in order to have the entrepreneurs. But those places that don't have freedom, don't have entrepreneurs, and everybody's poor. So it's self-evidently, again, it's not a trickle. And it's all based on win-win relationships, right? The entrepreneur hires workers, the worker's better off, and the entrepreneur's better off. So it's trickled down, it's trickled up, it's trickled sideways. But the value of the entrepreneur and the value of the capitalist, and I'm a finance guy, so I have a soft spot for the capitalist, and the capitalist is always belittled and denounced, and it's always Wall Street's fault, and bankers are the most evil people on the planet, and we're all Shylocks, right? But without capital, there's nothing. And without capital being willing to risk, there's nothing. So it's much more than trickle down. I think trickle down is an underestimate. Oh, and then you had the minimum wage? Yep. Yeah, I mean, I have not studied the studies. But I'll tell you this, there are several studies out there that refute the Princeton study. There's a blog post by Chicago economist who died last year, Becker, Gary Becker. Gary Becker had a blog, a regular blog that he did with Posner, but don't read the Posner stuff. Only read Gary Becker stuff. Posner is very mixed. Gary Becker had a post on the minimum wage. And he said, look, yeah, there's this study. These are the flaws. And here are the studies that have refuted this study. But the left will never cite those other studies. And the other guy to read, again from Chicago, though he's now at Hoover, is John Cochran. He has a blog called The Grumpy Economist. And he's wrong. I mean, I think he's wrong on some things, but on some of this stuff, he's just brilliant. And he's got some stuff on the minimum wage. He just dismantles the whole minimum wage argument. just dismantles it completely. It's an easy It's an easy one, right? It's very simple. If you artificially raise the price of a good, any good, what happened to demand for that good? Goes down. So what's the difference between bread and employees? It's the price is the same. It's like the law of gravity. Now, there are complexities because you can shift, there are alternatives, there are all kinds of stuff. But even when you take into account all that complexities, the same pattern happens. Unemployment goes up, all else held equal. The problem is holding all else equal. And that's what these studies, when you raise the minimum wage a little bit, it's very difficult to see the effects. Right? Because, not to mention the fact that prices go up in that region, all kinds of things happen, right? But the Keynesian, because I've done 2 debates on the last 3 days in Chicago. I did one with James Galbraith, the economist, the son of Kenneth Galbraith. And James is a big-time economist from the University of Texas in Austin. And then I debated a philosophy professor at Loyola last night who is a soft Marxist, I guess you would call him. And they both make the same argument. And it's hysterical in my view. You raise the minimum wage to 15. Now people have more money, right? So they are wealthier, so they spend more money. And because they spend more money, the economy grows. So I said, let's raise minimum wage to 100. The economy will boom. But it's talk about voodoo economics. This is voodoo economics. And this isn't even Keynes, because I don't think Keynes would tolerate this. This is a perversion of Keynes, which is what the neo-Keynesians are doing. You can't do that. If you raise, one of the things that happens if you raise it to $15 is, and Cochrane talks about this, is you don't get people behind the register anymore. You have an iPad, and you pick to order on the iPad. And you know what? At somewhere close to that price, it makes it beneficial to put in a machine that flips burgers. And there actually is a machine like that, and not Wendy's, Carl's Jr.'s is already testing them and talking about implementing them. So you will go to a fast food joint, and there won't be any people there. Now that's going to happen anyway, but raising the minimum wage will speed that process up in a time where the people working there don't have many alternatives. At a time where educational system is not training them to do better jobs. Right? Where the vocational schools, that we used to have in this country and other countries have, where people are trained to do things like, where you can make good money, like in welding. You can make good money in welding. There's a huge shortage in skilled labor, but labor in California. There are about 1 million jobs that are unfilled in California in skilled labor. But we don't train them for that. Right? We think it's dirty. Ugh, labor. Who wants that? Right? But, so all these policies are intertwined and they're all distorted.
All right.
Another Twitter, chat room.
Chat room, yes. And this is from Sword of Apollo. So I had to ask it. And I think this is one you can actually get to pretty quickly, but I think it's interesting. What role does the government have, if any, in ensuring that children are taken care of by parents or others? If no one is available to care for them, should they be wards of the state?
Yeah. Children are tough. I don't think it's easy to deal with questions regarding children. And clearly the state has some role. Because they have rights, but they can't exercise those rights themselves. So in a sense, children are handing over stewardship of their rights to their parents. But what if their parents are abusive? If the parents are abusive, it is the role of the state to take the kids out of that environment and to find them a different home. And there is some expense to that, but that is part of the state's role in protecting rights. And it's particularly, and the lines of what is abuse and what isn't abuse, those are tricky questions. I'm not an expert and I don't know the exact lines, but certainly there are cases where the state has to step in and become the steward of the rights until they can find an alternative situation for the children.
Oh, okay. Dan Rubin, Des Plaines. I think, I wonder what your thoughts are with respect to the education system having failed us because creativity and free thinking seem to be in decline.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think thinking is in decline, and that's our educational system. So my thoughts are to privatize it. You know, it's to get the state out of it, and to bring the kind of entrepreneurship, the kind of innovation and competition that we have in iPhone apps to the educational field. Well, the way you break through the control of the left is laws like what we have in Nevada, what I described earlier, education saving accounts. It's the way to break through. And I think vouchers are dangerous because the state gets to decide who gets a voucher and who doesn't, whereas the saving account, the state just gives you the money and you can do what you want with it as long as it's education. So I prefer those to that, but I'll take any step that gets the state out of the business, right? Out of the business of education. Well, look, I'm not saying you're asking what should be done, not what can be done. What can be done, you know, let's lie down and roll over and play dead because, you know, it's over. No, we have to fight. We have to fight. Yeah, the unions are strong. The bad guys are strong, absolutely, and they dominate us in terms of numbers. They dominate the universities. They dominate the schools. They dominate politics. Okay, I'm depressed. Let's go home. I mean, no, we're fighters. You wouldn't be here if you weren't fighters. So we have to fight. Are we going to win? I don't know. That's not the point. The option is not to just lay down and give up. We've got to fight. For our children, for our grandchildren, for ourselves, for our own honor and self-respect, we've got to fight. So I don't expect quick victory. I don't expect it to be easy. And I do think the fight has to be on fundamental issues and on their application, on everything that we apply. Education saving accounts. You guys were writing about it in the 80s, and here they are today. So, you know, it's a small victory. It's Nevada. But if Nevada goes well, who knows where it goes from there. And that starts breaking the unions. If you get an education saving accounts, forget about the unions. They're gone.
Hey, Yaron. I noticed in your address you quoted from the Declaration the most famous phrase, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I'm a big Jefferson fan, but that phrase was sort of borrowed and modified from John Locke, I believe, almost a century earlier. And the original phrase was life, liberty, and property. And it seems to me that that property is not really emphasized enough in our current culture or whatever, and the value of that, the right of individuals to own property. So I just wonder what you want to comment on.
I agree with you, but philosophically, there's only one right, and that is the right to life. You have a right to do what you will with your life. Property is a consequence of the right to life. Why is property important? Because I need property in order to live. I need to be able to farm this land in order to bear the fruit of this land. I need to be able to own the product of what I create if I'm in business and working on it. That's what's necessary for my life. So, and then what is the purpose of life? The pursuit of happiness, to achieve happiness. So there's one right, life, and then there's these derivative rights. And you're right, because it didn't make it into the Declaration, unfortunately, I think it has been sidelined, and it was one of the first to go. And it's the same with the Bill of Rights. Unfortunately, everything about the Bill of Rights that Madison said when he objected to it has come true. If it's not exactly stated in the Bill of Rights, you don't have it. Madison said if we articulate a Bill of Rights, people will think that these are the only rights we have. Even though they wrote, this is not an exhaustive list, and you know. But today we do, right? So the only reason we have free speech in America today is because we have a First Amendment. Europe doesn't have free speech anymore, right? Even though free speech is a derivative of the right to life, a derivative of the right to property, certainly a derivative of the right to pursue happiness, but they don't count derivatives. If it's not written, they don't, you know, one of my problems with Scalia is the textualism, right? It's not the text that matters. It's what it means, what it actually in reality means. And we might know more about what it means today than they did back then. We might know more about what rights mean today than what they did back then. They could have been wrong. And we need to be able to, now it doesn't mean you change the Constitution, but it means you interpret it based on the truth, not based on the words.
I'm thinking Joe Bass might have a question, but I'm going to let him get up his courage to raise his hand on that. Would you like to say something, Joe?
That surprised me.
Okay.
But I'm willing to be surprised. Early in your talk, you talked about crony capitalism. You criticized crony capitalism. Now, Marxists would say that the ruling class always controls the government. And the choice is which class is going to control government. Laissez-faire capitalism is a myth because any capitalist system will use the government to advance the interests of capital, I suppose. So a free enterprise system is not sustainable. Eventually it will turn into crony capitalism. How do you respond to that?
So, first, I never used the term crony capitalism, or I tried not to. I used cronyism. I think I did. Maybe I missed one, but I try not to use crony capitalism because I don't think there are many forms of capitalism. I think there's only one form of capitalism. Capitalism is a system that, you know, with the role of the government is to protect property rights and that all property is privately owned. And I would add to that, in my view, capitalism is a system where you have a clear separation between state and economics, so that economic power has no role in political power and political power has no role in economics. So if you say the state cannot regulate anything, right? It cannot tax by force. It cannot use any kind of coercive mechanism on business. Then business has no interest in the state. Because, you know, if it's a clear line, then what advantage do you have of getting the hold of the reins of power? It doesn't give you anything. It doesn't give you more money, more economic power, because you've separated the two. Now, it's not easy to separate the two. But that's what a proper constitution would do. I mean, in my view, a proper constitution would have at least four separations. Four separations I can think of. There might be more. A separation of church and state, but I would broaden the separation of church and state to a separation of ideas from state. The state should have no ideas. It's there to protect you from criminals and crooks and fraudsters and foreign invaders. It's not pro-capitalism or pro-socialism or pro-Catholicism or pro-atheism or pro-anything. It's there to do a job, and that's one job, protect. That's it, protection. Separation of state from economics. The state has no role in economic life. You want to be a socialist? Right? You want to be a socialist under capitalism? Cool. Get your friends together. Go start a commune where each gets according to his needs and, you know, gives from according to his ability. And, you know, I think you'll be miserable. I actually know you'll be miserable. But you have a right to be miserable. That's fine. You don't have to participate in the, you know, free exchange of values. You can go and do something else. As long as you're not violating somebody's rights, the state has no role in telling you how to live. Separation of state from science, which I think is obvious once you accept the first two, but you have to state it these days. And the separation of state from education. Education is about ideas. If you separate the state from ideas, you have to separate it from education. And those need to be drawn in very clear lines. Now, there are issues, and there are always going to be issues, like how you define property rights. What is property, particularly in a digital age? And the state, which is supposed to protect property, also has to have responsibility in defining it. That's where you can get into some cronyism. You know, and at the end of the day, at the end of all of that, we all get the government we deserve. So you can create the best government in the world, but if the people don't deserve it, they're going to destroy it. So we have to have well-educated people who understand the consequences of government intervention in the economy and of cronyism. And what did Franklin say about vigilance? I give you a republic if you can keep it. But there's also another statement about being vigilant. But that's the reality. You have to keep it. So we can't attain the ideal state and then step back and say, okay, it's all done. Work is going to consistently be done to show that it is the ideal state, that there is nothing better, that we're going to have to keep fighting for it. It's never going to go away. But we can do a lot better than what we have today before we get to that ideal. But I really don't like using the crony capitalism. I use, because cronyism is a feature of statism. All statist regimes have built into them cronyism. You think the government doesn't want cronyism today? Of course they want cronyism. They love to have businessmen come grovel before them and try to bribe them. My favorite story here is Microsoft. I don't know if you know this story, that in the early 90s, Bill Gates, the executives from Microsoft were brought in front of Congress. And Orrin Hatch, it was a committee that Orrin Hatch, and he yelled at them. And he said, you guys have to start lobbying. Because Microsoft spent $0 on lobbying, no presence in Washington, D.C., nothing in the Beltway, zero. And he said, you got to start lobbying, you got to build a building here in D.C., you got to have a presence here. And Microsoft, the guys at Microsoft said, look, you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. Right? And they walked away and they didn't do anything. Guess what happened a year later? The Justice Department went after them for giving away a product. Internet Explorer. That was the initial lawsuit against Microsoft, was for giving away a product. Guess how much money Microsoft today spends on lobbying? Tens of millions of dollars. They've got a beautiful building right behind Cato. They've got a beautiful glass building. They offer auditorium there free for nonprofits. So we've used it on occasion. So I've been in the Microsoft building in the Beltway. Right. Cato's also in the Beltway, but that's another story. So, yeah, I mean, statesists need the capitalists to come grovel. They want the capitalists to come grovel. This is how politicians get rich. I always wondered about that. How do you enter politics poor and leave politics rich? Something's going on there. There's a famous, the Willie Brown. You know Willie Brown in California? I don't know if you remember. Willie Brown was this very flamboyant politician, you know, came from a very poor background, became the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the state of California, and then mayor of San Francisco. And he came from a very poor background, and he's a really, really incredibly wealthy guy today. And it's like, how did this happen? All he's done is politics, right? Politics is not a wealth-producing activity. Quite the contrary. So cronyism is a feature of statism. There's crony socialism, there's crony fascism, there's crony mixed economy. There's no crony capitalism. Capitalism is the only system that destroys cronyism. It gets rid of it because it creates a separation between state and economics.
Well, we're out of questions online, although there's lots of comments in the chat room about what a fantastic talk this has been. And then let's all give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
And I just want to remind everyone that you can get your own Ayn Rand T-shirt with the Heartland Institute on the back, so people can see it
And buy
coming
the
and going.
book.
And you can also buy the book, of course.
And
We
I'll
have
sign
copies
it.
of those. And Yaron would be very happy to sign books for everybody, and we can still mingle in here in the event space
And if I'm
until it's time to
allowed
go.
to say, we have a dinner here in Chicago once a year in June, and there are invitations over there in envelopes that you're free to take them. Yep.
That's
you.
great. Thank you.